Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Business Line Leader and Director of our Global Medical and Laboratory Business here at Intertek. And today I'm so excited to be joined by Scott Blue. Hi, Scott. How are you doing today?
Hey, Clarissa. I'm doing well. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. So typically I like to start off with a little introduction. Maybe you can share a little bit about yourself and how you got to Intertek and what you do within our organization.
For sure. Well, I have about 30 years of general management experience. Came from the product side. I've been with Intertek for 3 years, and I'm the senior director in charge of both the Arlington Heights Lab, sales and operations, and the Fridley Lab, sales and operations. We're here to talk about medical in the Fridley Lab.
Yes, very excited to talk about that. So as you say, right, you have oversight over our lab up in Fridley in Minnesota. Obviously, you guys have a strong medical team there, strong medical presence, and have seen, quite a lot over the 3 years that you've been here with us. And then, even before that, with what the team has been seeing in terms of, the different devices that are coming to the lab and, different types of products that they're testing. So, from your perspective with what you've seen running that lab, what are the types of medical devices that you're seeing and, how have those evolved over the last 3 years since you've been here and maybe even further back with your team?
Yeah. So in the short time that I have been with Intertek, we have seen quite a bit of change. Traditionally, we've been working with, folks that are manufacturing devices for hospitals or for use with clinicians. And we are seeing this trend, this pivot to more of a at-home service. It's becoming far more prevalent. It's an increasing percentage of our business and the work that we do. And we see that trend, Clarissa, for a number of reasons. We see it because of the aging population. In fact, just a side note, there's 54 million folks in the United States that are 65 or over.
I know, it's crazy.
I know. 16.5% of the population. So we've got that aging population and folks that are looking for convenience and at-home health care. The at-home healthcare is more readily accepted by the insurers and supported by the government. So there's that trend.
Yeah.
But super convenient and very inexpensive when compared to the services at your traditional, hospitals, if you will. So there's an uptick in the need and the interest, and our clients are developing, new technology to address those needs. And so there's an influx of devices that require that testing, specific that home healthcare testing. So that's one of the trends.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting when you say that, right? Because we see, new entrants into the market, right? Developing these home healthcare products to address all of the things you just said, right? With aging populations and people wanting more readily accessible healthcare. But you do also see a lot of these traditional manufacturers. I mean, you guys are in the Twin Cities, right? Where it's a huge medical hub for all of the big manufacturers, right? And they're moving into this space too, right? It's not just startups and new companies wanting to develop these technologies. It's these big players as well.
Absolutely. No, it's boutique companies. So we're dealing with a lot of startups, but we are dealing with a lot of the really big, the who's who of the medical device manufacturer industry in this space. So far more of them are developing product to address this trend and get ahead of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that we're seeing this consumer-driven healthcare as well, right? I think now we see everyone, sees themselves in whatever they're consuming as right? I am a consumer. I have the right to have an opinion. So be it, my appliances, but also my healthcare, right? Like I'm a consumer now and I want it to be easy and convenient and cost-effective and be able to, access it at my fingertips or have home health, have my healthcare at home.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's that consumer-centric device and needs, right? I'm same way, and of course, I've got family members that have these devices at home and need them, and it's amazing how effective they are. I mean, it's that whole space has come a long way.
I think that's, I love to hear you say that too, because I think we see people adopting and using healthcare more frequently if they have it at home as well, right? So I think you have this idea of health equity, right? And having more access to more people because they don't have to travel somewhere to get their healthcare, but also maybe I'm more likely to, use this monitoring device or do something if I can do it in the convenience of my own home rather than having to, travel to a clinician or to a doctor.
Yeah. And of course, affordability, you talked about, I'm a consumer and I'm looking for a cost-effective solution. We're all about that. And this is certainly more affordable than hospital care. And it spans, these devices too, Clarissa, span a real spectrum. So, we're working with clients on CPAP type products, which are the continuous, positive air. Pressure that folks are looking for to help them with their breathing. We've worked with somebody on a vaginal dilator. We've worked with someone on chronic migraine pulse generation. We've worked on electrocardiographs. So it really runs the gamut in types of product that are now in this space and made available for home use.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about all the different types of, even devices that maybe you didn't think could go in a home previously. Now with the advancements in technology, we're seeing people take really complex pieces of medical equipment that can now be used in a home type setting, all the way through to which, one of the areas that I find the most fascinating with digital healthcare and things like that, where, maybe you're using a health tracking type device or monitoring device, and it's going back to some sort of tablet and then getting sent to a doctor, and then the doctor's reading that and sending back either, a diagnosis or a treatment plan. Exactly. The advancements are just incredible.
The other advancement or the other trend is this telehealth, which is a big to do now. In fact, how many commercials do we see now with this telehealth? It seems that there's a number all of a sudden. They've just sprouted up. It seems like yesterday that they're offering these services. So that's going to continue to drive this trend. Yeah,
well, and I think too, right, pre-pandemic era, right? People never would have thought like, a call with my doctor or a video call with my doctor is as sufficient as being in person. And now you see maybe it's more convenient for the doctors because they can get through more patients, or maybe it's more convenient for you because you can go into a lunchroom on your break rather than having to take a half day off. So you're just like, forget it. I'm not going to go to the doctor because I can't take that amount of time. Right. So I think now we'll see this just continue because of the flexibility and ease.
It's the 2023 version of that house visit. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, that's so true. That's such a good way to look at it. It's totally it's a house call right from anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's the black bag 2023 black bag visit. Right. Exactly.
That's so true. So when we look at, some of these things that we're seeing with all of these different types of products, so be it, the different types of CPAPs that you're seeing or monitoring devices or things that are going at home, how have you, right, and your team been preparing for these new devices, getting the lab ready? Because obviously there's additional test requirements, right, outside of how we test a traditional device.
Well, one of the things we've had to do is bone up on the standards, right? So we've added that accreditation and scope to our lab in Fridley. The other thing that it's triggered is a need for additional equipment to be able to support the testing required. So, and some of that is performance based, Clarissa. So we're talking about like shock and vibe type equipment that would put it through its rigors and make sure that it's going to be able to withstand some of that, that it's going to be put through in those home environments. So I mean, it's it's getting ahead of it too. So we do sit on committees and standards and that kind of thing, keeping abreast that way. We're adding our, those accreditations to the lab, and then we're getting the proper equipment that's required too. So we're making the investment to be able to soup to nuts, provide that solution to our clients in that space.
Yeah. And I think, it's definitely part of our overall strategy for medical, right? We're expanding in a lot of our different facilities because we know that this trend is not going anywhere, right? We know that manufacturers are going to continue to develop these home health products that consumers are still going to want to be able to have their healthcare at home. And probably, you know, when you bring up this number of aging population and people with chronic illnesses, that's just going to go up, right? I mean, we're at this point now, but that's just going to keep growing as people live longer, right? And live with chronic diseases and chronic illnesses for longer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, to drive that point home, I think the estimate is that in 2023, the market is about 145 billion with a CAGR of a cumulative growth of about 7.5%. I think it might be a little more than that, but that's just gives you an idea as to the size of the market and how fast it is growing. So yeah, it's just going to continue and get bigger. And
and absolutely, and on people like us with the test labs, right, to continue to evolve and develop and continue to get more equipment and make sure that we're, you know, readily available to support all of that type testing. Because I think it's interesting too, as you mentioned, right, with performance testing, something that, you know, maybe people don't think as much about, but, you know, now that you introduce a device into a home setting, altitude becomes more important. All of the shock and vibe testing becomes more important because you can't control, you know, if the device is going to someone who lives on the top of a mountain at 8,000 feet or someone who lives at sea level or in a really humid, hot environment. And you have to worry about all of these things where you don't really have to think about them as much with a traditional device.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not in that neat, you know, controlled environment in the hospital. It's at home being used in a home setting. And to your point, in various locations around the world, right? Yeah,
and you know, you could have children using them, elderly people, right? Where I think, you know, that's interesting too, as we start looking at the different types of populations that may be using devices, and usability becomes more important, right? As well, because now it's not just a nurse or a doctor using a device. It's someone's 85-year-old grandmother who's trying to push buttons on the device or control a handheld or do whatever it might be. And they have to be able to function and use those devices to receive the kind of treatment they need.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, is the use case, you know, the usability and the use case, like where is, you know, we have to be, you know, in the lab, you know, our testing and our approach is to be really conscious of that and, you know, where it's being used and that usability, right, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, we have to then be more creative and more collaborative and thinking about all of those things when we're working through the evaluation process, because it's not a trained professional, right, that would be using the device, but someone who could just be anybody, a layperson somewhere. Yeah, so really, really interesting. That's right. What do you think too, in terms of, you know, I'm a home healthcare device manufacturer, I'm trying to get ready to come to the lab. What are things doing, you know, that we can do differently, or how manufacturers should prepare differently, considering, you know, a bunch of these different changes and test requirements?
You know, that's a good question. I think, you know, for them, you know, understanding that one thing, you know, there are some different requirements. There are some different standards that they need to adhere to, and I know a lot of them. You know, we said before that these large companies are getting into this space, or there's some boutique folk that are getting into it, and sometimes navigating that is, you know, can be a bit difficult because they don't have the, you know, they have the experience manufacturing medical devices, but the regulatory piece may be a bit foreign to them. So we do have, you know, I mentioned that you know, we have consulting services and a, you know, kind of a soup to nuts service, you know, a plethora of it, and a smorgasbord that can help guide you through this, if you will, this gauntlet, this home health gauntlet, so that you know, you can make sure as a manufacturer that you're crossing T's and you're dotting I's, and when it does get to that point where you're testing and certifying that the skids have been greased and you know, you're going to be more prepared you know, to go through that process. Yeah, so that's one thing I would recommend. The manufacturer to consider is to get us involved early on so that we can, you know, provide that consultation.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the idea of preliminary work, right, and working as early as you can. So either via working, you know, with a group like consulting, right, to make sure you're on the right path and considering all the standards, or coming in and doing some of those shock and vibe and environmental tests early, doing performance testing to make sure that, hey, we're taking this device that traditionally has been used in a hospital or a clinic, but now we're modifying it so it can be used in a home, making sure you can meet those environmental requirements, right, by doing pre-testing before you get too far down that path.
Really
the other thing
point.
too,
yeah,
the other thing too, which, I think sometimes people forget about, but now becomes even more important when you're using it in a home, is EMC, right? So we touched a lot on the safety, but not on the EMC. But when you think about these devices going into a home, the EMC testing and making sure with, what you're emitting and all of those things, it becomes even more important because now you're introducing so many devices at once, right? And how can you show that the device functions the way that it's supposed to with all this interference?
No, it's a tremendous point because, again, getting back to the controlled environment, it's not a controlled environment, right?
Yeah.
So you do have to make sure that it is not affecting other devices and that it's not being affected by devices. So, and to your point about performance testing, Clarissa, as it relates to EMC, it would behoove manufacturers to do a pre-scan, to bring it in prior to the full-blown testing, to do a pre-scan with EMC to see, are we on track? Do we have a problem? Do we have an issue? And they can address it early on rather than, during the actual testing. So it makes sense to do that upfront and early.
Yeah, nothing's worse than coming in and starting your full EMC testing and, failing on day 1 or day 2, right? And then having to go back and make some changes to a product or do some redesign,
exactly.
right? I mean, nothing's worse than that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, EMC sometimes gets forgotten, but we are seeing from regulatory agencies too a lot more focus on EMC, especially because these devices are becoming more technology forward and advanced. They're having more elements of connectivity involved in it, right? So you may be having, multiple modes of operation. You may connect via Wi-Fi. You may have 5G. Right? So there's so many more things that have to be considered. And we see these regulatory agencies pushing back and wanting to see a lot of data showing that you've tested in different modes of operation, different configurations, making sure that, as a manufacturer, you consider that now you're introducing different risks in terms of, the EMC as well. And then, of course, and we've talked about this on this podcast before, but of course, then that gets into everything with cybersecurity too, right? So that's a whole nother level that now when you're taking a device into a home, you have to consider.
And something we offer a service with.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Of course, in an area that we'll, continue to see expansion into, and we'll continue to see, these devices becoming more technologically advanced.
Well, I think it's important to, what you're noting, Clarissa, is these, all of these different changes. And I think it's important to note that ETL, that Intertek has a seat at these tables and is discussing, the changes to the standards and, engaging the horizon and what's coming up. And we can provide that insight and that consultation to our clients. And can make sure that they understand what's coming up and what they need to prepare for. So that's
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as I had kind of mentioned earlier, I'm very passionate and interested in digital health, and that's a lot of where we're looking towards. As we're looking towards expanding what our services are. But then you also think AI and virtual reality and all of these things that we'll continue to see over the coming years. I mean, we're just going to have just a completely different landscape than what we currently have in terms of manufacturers and the services that we're able to provide. So it's an exciting time to be in healthcare for sure. Exciting time to be in medical devices.
I know we're super excited about it. Yeah. And we've got a solid team up in Fridley. So.
Well, perfect. Well, anything else, Scott, that you want to add on the topic of home healthcare as you guys are preparing and getting ready? I know it's a really exciting space for you guys up there in the Twin Cities.
It is, yeah. And to your point, it's one of the largest medical device areas in the country. I think it's second only to California, and I think they estimate 700 to 800 medical device manufacturers.
Yeah, a lot.
Quite a few of them. So, no, again, reiterating that we do offer a full complement of services, whether that's consulting up front or testing and certification, and to your point, cybersecurity services and everything in between. For these home healthcare medical device manufacturers or medical device manufacturers in general, whether that's all in Fridley or it's elsewhere in our family of labs, either here in North America or around the world, we do have the most extensive breadth of services in the industry. So that's all I would say, that if you're interested and you're in the Twin Cities, we can certainly service you. But we've got a number of labs scattered throughout the country and in the world to be able to take care of anybody, no matter the need.
Yeah. Well, and I love ending on that note because, as I have oversight over all of our medical labs globally, it is really exciting to think about, just the breadth that we have, right, and the scope and the places where we sit. So I really appreciate your time today. It was so great to catch up about home health care. And thank you to everyone for joining us. If you have questions, feel free to reach out and we will make sure to get answers back to you. Thanks so much.
Take care. Yeah, thank you.
You too. Thanks.